So we had scheduled a nature walk on the trail for Mother's Day this year, but because of current events, that wasn't able to happen. So I decided to try to put together a virtual walk so that folks could perhaps go along and find some things that they might not have seen on the trail otherwise, or if they're staying at home today, they can do the walk while they're still at home. First of all, I want to thank everyone at the Friends of the Cynwyd Heritage Trail and also Lower Merion Conservancy for sponsoring this virtual walk. So we're going to start at the Cynwyd Station trailhead, and at this trailhead there are some gardens that are fairly well manicured. We're going to see several different types of ways that the plants are maintained along the trail. And this is a place where they are mainly maintained kind of more like a garden you would have in your yard. So it's pretty labor intensive. So there's benches to sit. We're going to start here at Cynwyd Station. That's where we are here. And then we're going to walk to the Barmouth trailhead. And then we'll stop a little ways on the other side of Barmouth trailhead, kind of before we get to the Pencoed Trail or the bridge. And so you can see in this area here where trail volunteers have been working and trying to improve this area with some different types of plants that we hope will be attractive to animals along the trail as well as to people. So one thing you see a lot on the trail, of course, is people walking and jogging. So let's run a little video here. You can also hear birds. In the background there's a crow, and that's a house wren that we're listening to. Can you hear him? The crow's going caw, 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 and the house wren is kind of making that very fluid, warbly sort of sound. And so even though there are people using the trail and houses close to it, there's still a lot of wildlife. And in fact, while I was walking in this area, this is going to be a little hard to see, but we saw some really great wildlife. So take a look in the back here. I'm going to run this and take a close look way back in here. There he goes. Got the little hand pointer. Can you see him back there? There, he's running through. It's a fox. So it's great to see that, see the animals along the trail. Maybe we'll see some other things as we go along here. So in terms of plants, on this side of the trail, you can see there are lots of trees planted, and some of these trees are things like cherries and apples that we hope will be attractive to birds and other animals. And it's also important to remember that the large trees that you might see here, we've got some pine trees, and these are on private property next to the trail. These are really important too. We really like to see these mature trees. That's not something that happens overnight, and so and they have a really big impact on what can live there. So it's important that to protect those big trees. The trail is, some areas along the trail are fairly disturbed, and they've been altered by humans for various reasons. And so lots of the side slopes of the trail back up to people's yards. And so some of the homeowners have done a really great job of taking care of these areas. And so here's a really nice one where we have lots of different things that are planted, and they're holding the slopes. You can see the soil is mostly covered all the time. There's some things blooming here. There could be animals living in there. And that's what we really like to see on the trail. To create some really great habitat so we can see lots of animals. Now some people might think that this looks bad to have all the dead brush from last year, but I actually like to see it. If you take a look right up there, see that little hole in there? If we go take a closer look at that hole, there's probably somebody living in there, maybe a chipmunk. I think it's too small for a groundhog. There are also birds that nest in those holes, so we actually like to see those because those are places that wildlife can live and raise their families. There are also lots of different kinds of plants along the trail. Some of these are plants that nobody planted in particular. They just showed up. And here are some examples here. We've got several different things. This yellow plant here is called Barbaria. And this is a really interesting plant. It's a European plant that was brought here because people liked it. It's related to things like mustard and cabbage. So you can eat it. It's sometimes called wintercress. But what's really interesting about it is this plant can be used as a kind of biological control if you're growing cabbages. So if you've ever grown cabbages or things related to cabbage, you know that there are caterpillars that cause a lot of problem for cabbage plants. Well, this plant is kind of a death trap for caterpillars. So what happens is that the moth that produces those caterpillars will lay eggs on this plant. And when the little caterpillars hatch out, they find things they like to eat, but they're actually kind of poisonous. And so the little caterpillars will eat all the leaves, but eventually they'll build up enough toxin so that it stops them and they can't continue to reproduce. So this plant kind of acts like a trap for bad insects that can protect your cabbages. So sort of interesting. The name Barbaria is interesting too. It's named after Saint Barbara, apparently. And Saint Barbara was the patron saint of artillerymen, that is gunners. And so because this plant apparently was used, this is a long, long time ago in like the 1600s, this plant was used to treat the wounds, like gunshot wounds, basically. And so this plant became known as a cure for people that have been injured by explosions. So lots of interesting history. Now this other plant around here that has the little pink flowers and the sort of pink tops, this is another plant that was brought here from Europe. And it's a mint, so it's related to things like spearmint and also basil, oregano, things that we eat. And technically you can eat this. I'm not sure that I would recommend it. It's called dead nettle, which is a really funny name, but it's because people thought this looked like another plant called nettle, but it didn't have the stickers that nettle has. And so we also have nettle on the trail. So here's the real nettle. And this is what it looks like. It's not very big yet, but you can see the leaves look kind of similar to this one back here. If you zoom in, they're kind of similar, but real nettle has on it little tiny hairs that are sort of like little hypodermic needles. And when you touch it, those little needles inject a histamine into your skin and they cause a skin reaction. So touching nettles isn't very nice. And I have a zoomed in picture. I didn't take it, but I had to borrow it. A zoomed in picture here of these little hypodermic needles. So these actually break off in your skin and they inject a little bit of a histamine. To me, it's sort of like feels like a cross between itching and hurting. It kind of makes you want to scratch, but it hurts a little bit too. Nettles are also edible, and people have used them for many things throughout history. Another really nice plant that you will see just starting to bloom in this area adjacent to the trail between the Cynwyd station and the park is this beautiful little plant here. It's called Spiderwort, or Tradescantia. And this is a really interesting plant. It's actually pretty closely related to grasses, but unlike the grasses don't have very conspicuous flowers. But this one still has flowers that are kind of conspicuous. However, they don't have any nectar or anything, but they produce a lot of pollen. And so the insects like this little bumblebee, this little bee that visit the spiderwort, they come to collect pollen because there isn't any nectar. The flowers typically only last for a day. And I guess the name spiderwort comes from these little hairs. So I happen to get a really nice picture. So these are the stamens. There's 6 stamens on here, like all of these kind of lily-related plants. But on the stamens, you can see these tiny little hairs. And these hairs are really interesting. They are only one single cell layer thick. So they're very thin, and normally we can't see single cells. So scientists have been very interested in studying these. And so one thing I can do on a virtual field trip that I can't do on a regular field trip is show you a microscope view of what you would see if you take one of these little hairs coming off that stamen and put it onto a microscope. So scientists have actually used these to study cell division. So let's take a look. So here we're actually looking at one of those rows of cells, and now we've zoomed in on a single cell, and this is the nucleus of that cell. These are all the chromosomes that are in there, and they're getting ready, the cell's getting ready to divide. So all the genes on those chromosomes, the chromosomes are thickening, and they're lining up in the middle of this cell. And now there's 2 copies of each chromosome, and what's going to happen is they're going to pull there. We just pulled away to the 2 opposite ends of the cell, and now this is going to build a cell wall to complete the process of cell division. Now this is speeded up. It took about an hour for this to really happen, so we speeded it up so that we could watch it in about a minute. So that spiderwort plant provides us a really nice model system for looking at this process of cell division. And there's some scientists, I know a scientist who spent pretty much his whole working life studying those little stamen hairs. So these little hairs right here, that's what he was looking at. So it's pretty cool. So remember I said that the spiderwort plant is fairly closely related to the grasses, and so sometimes people don't remember that grasses have flowers too. And that's because in the grasses the flowers aren't very conspicuous because they don't attract insects. Grasses are pollinated by wind, and so they put all their energy into making pollen, not into making pretty flowers. So that's why they sometimes cause allergy problems too, because they make so much pollen. But grasses are really important members of the trail plants because they hold the soil really well, and they also provide, the seeds that they produce provide a lot of food for animals too. We have lots of different grasses along the trail. Yeah. So now we're down to the Cynwyd Park, and the sun's just coming up and starting to light the plants over here on the west side of the stream. And so we can see the birch back here. Birches have that peely bark. Very nice kind of plant. And we've got some other plants that are in this wetland back here, and also some interesting animals. Let's take a look down in the creek, and we can see some ducks that are swimming down here in the creek. So these are mallards. Here's the male with the beautiful green head, and then the female is much less conspicuous. She's kind of this brown. Watch their feet. They've got bright orange feet. Really awesome looking. And they're just swimming around, eating bits of grass and algae, and perhaps if they find insects in there, they eat those too. In the background of that last slide, that last video, maybe you could hear the sound of the RedWinged Blackbird. And that's an awesome bird that's hanging around. They like to be around wetlands, and so the males have these bright shoulder patches, and these are very territorial birds. I have a video of one. You can see him up here. See, every time he makes that call, you can see he flashes those red patches. There you go. Pretty awesome. And they're hanging around out there now, so if you go down to the creek, you might be able to see them. Another bird that is common on the trail, and actually just common in our area in general, is this little guy. Now this is a, you hear the redwing in the background? But this is actually a sparrow down in here. There's the redwing. I really like the reflection of the trees, that yellow in the water, as that little sparrow is eating her. See all the insects flying around? The insects are starting to come out. Lots of the birds will eat those insects too. There's the redwing in the background. Awesome, huh? So cute. The song sparrow is a very common bird. Let's take a look at one up in a tree. On one of those song sparrows. Here he is, up here in the tree. So hold on and watch. We'll settle down here a little bit. There's his call. Hear the jogger going by? He doesn't care. He'll keep singing. Boy, it's a lot of work to make that song. You see his shoulders just moving up and down to get that song out. It's a lot of work. Great song in the morning. He's out there greeting the day. Another bird that you might hear in this area is the yellowthroat. And these are much harder to see. They're a small bird. The males are gorgeous. They have this black mask. They sort of look like they're hiding. The females are a little bit less conspicuous, but they make a great little sound. And this is a bird that we're really interested in keeping along the trail. And the numbers have decreased over time, and so we really want to keep these brushy areas where it will hang out. So take a listen. Hear him? That's kind of a widgety, widgety, widgety. Let's play it one more time. It's a great little sound. There it is. So that's this little bird right here. And this is a bird that is not going extinct necessarily, but it's on the decline in our area, and it really likes to grow in these thickets. So areas where you don't want to walk through because there's so much brush and maybe plants like multiflora rose that might be a little bit weedy. These birds really like those kind of areas, so it's nice to leave some of them. So another great bird that you might hear along the trail, but it's hard to see, is the wood thrush. And this is another one that's kind of in trouble, and we really hope that they'll stay. They like big trees. So we're going to listen to the wood thrush here, and at the same time we're actually going to see some robins. So let's see if we can get this to go. So here are the robins flying around. And in the background, can you hear that kind of flute-like violet? That song. That right there. It makes different sounds. The wood thrush is an awesome bird. Very kind of ethereal in the background. Let's play it one more time. And it's actually related to the robins. So the robins are also a type of thrush. There's the wood thrush. The wood thrushes are a brown bird. Really great. And they like to be along the creek. And they also really like the tall trees. So it's important to keep those trees. There's the thrush. Other birds in the background too. I hear a gnatcatcher. I think that actually might be the gnatcatcher. Now this is another member of the fauna of animals that you might see along the trail, and this is a kitty cat. And the cats cause problems for us on the trail because they will prey on those birds and eat the baby birds out of the nest. So I'm a big cat lover, and in fact I think I have 2 of the sisters of this cat that I rescued from the trail and I keep in my house. But they don't go outside. So it's really a better thing if you're going to have cats to not let them run out because they cause a lot of damage to bird life along the trail. Another animal that we're not going to see today but that is fairly common is deer. And so some of these areas along the slopes where there's been some erosion here, I hope it's not from people running up and down the slopes. I think sometimes it is. But also we do have a lot of deer, and so they will tend to make paths that can cause some problems for erosion. Usually though, the deer are a little bit less conspicuous, and I think this is a deer trail going up through this slope. But it was really interesting here because on this slope we've got a great little plant here called Mae Apple. And the Mae apples you can see here, they're very shiny this time of year. This one, here's the Mae Apple close up, and it looks like a little umbrella. But in this part of the slope here, what had happened is I could see that somebody had been eating these. So something had eaten all the leaves off of the Mae Apple. There's the flower here. I suppose deer, although supposedly deer don't eat Mae Apple, but you never know. They eat lots of things. But the Mae Apple is a native plant, and we really like to see it out here. So as we walk closer to the Barmouth station, I noticed that some graffiti artists have been at work under the bridge on Belmont, and it's kind of cute. We don't like to promote graffiti, but I'm pretty sure it's chalk, and so it'll wash off. So somebody had written, "I love you, Happy Mother's Day." So Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, but please don't graffiti. It's not such a great plan. So now we're at Barmouth, and Barmouth is another one of the trailheads where you can park your car. It's right next to West Laurel Hill Cemetery, so we're at the entrance to the cemetery as well. And so this is another trailhead with a kiosk with information about the trail, and another one of these more managed flower beds where it's much more manicured. And so we have volunteers that take care of these areas. There are lots of places to sit and contemplate along the trail, and this part near Barmouth, there is a stream, and so it's a lovely place to sit and hang out. But we do have some challenges in this area with erosion, and so let's take a look. We want to be a little bit careful about climbing up and down on the creek. So let's take a look here as we walk up close to the creek. It looks great, but as we get in close here, we can see a lot of water has been moving through here. Hear the song sparrow in the background. And so there's been some erosion along the creek here. So we wouldn't want to walk down in this area. It would really be a good idea to keep away from this area where there's erosion. If you look down in there though, sometimes you can see animals. Maybe we'll take a closer look in a little bit. Here's another area where there's been, right next to it, you can see the erosion is really bad. And if we don't take care of this, we're going to lose the path here. The erosion is actually coming up to the creek. So it's important that we try to manage this area and not walk down these slopes and increase that erosion. Here's another picture showing how high the water gets in this part of the creek. When there are big rains, the water really fills up and is undermining some of these slopes. And so we're actually going to be trying to do some work along here to minimize that. Here's somebody you could see along the creek. This is, I'm pretty sure it's a first-year red-tailed hawk. When he flew away, I could see the white band under his tail feathers, and so that means it was probably a first-year hawk. And so these are birds of prey. They will eat things like squirrels and mice and chipmunks, and hopefully hopefully he'll find a mate and maybe nest in this area. So one of the things that we're trying to do to slow down erosion on the creek is right back here, is do some plantings. And so in this case, what we're doing is planting right in the turf, in the grass that's already there. And so a whole bunch of shrubs and ground cover type plants were put in here just very recently. And so we just want to protect them for a few years. Let's take a close look at what's in there. So these are things like some shrubs, like viburnum shrubs that will have berries that the birds can eat, and so they'll provide food for wildlife. They'll also help to stabilize the bank so that we don't have problems with it washing away. The creek is back in here. So we'll kind of protect these a little bit for a few years, but eventually these should take hold and they shouldn't require a lot of maintenance. It'll be more like more like a native type of forest. Here's a close look. This is actually a sedge. Sedges are related to grasses, and so some people think that especially people that work in flower beds a lot, think of the grasses and sedges as being like weeds, but actually they're a really important part of the native plants that we find on the trail, and so we want to replace some of the grasses that have been here before. And so this is one that we hope will take off and provide lots of food for animals and stabilize those banks. And so there's signs on these trails, or on these beds. There are some signs that have been put up. And so when you see these signs, you might not realize it might not look like a flower bed, but it's really not. It's a natural habitat area. And so it's going to look a little bit more wild because it's really there for the animals, not so much for us to look at. So very close to that area where you can see here the markers are there. I turned around and took a look back, and look what I found. Here's a fox again. I've got a much better view of the fox this time, running across the field. He's so beautiful. And there he goes. So on that note, I just want to wish you all a happy Mother's Day, and I especially want to wish a happy Mother's Day to my mother. The reason that I'm interested in flowers and wildlife is because when I was younger, my mother took me out and we into the woods, and we looked at plants a lot, and this is one that I remember. This is a plant called Spring Beauty, and it occurs in the Cynwyd Park. If you go down there, you'll be able to find it. It's a very small little flower. You have to look close to see these little stripes. When I was a kid, we called these flowers candy stripes. And the stripes on here, what they're actually for is they're little road signs for insects. And so those are like arrows that are pointing to the center of that flower, telling the insect that that is a place that they can get nectar. So with that, we'll wish everyone a happy Mother's Day, and please enjoy your time on the Cynwyd Heritage Trail.